kia ora everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We've called it Fire Smart Restoration. My name's Wendy Sullivan, and I am Project Coordinator for the Wider Nature Network, as well as working for New Zealand Trust, which is a sponsor of ours. Today's webinar on Fire Smart Restoration, we know that the weather gets hotter and drier, and the way that we plant and restore our land can make a real difference to how fire spreads. So we want to make sure that we're responsible as well as mitigating any impact that we might be having. So today's session is all about the practical ideas that you can take home, from choosing plants that are less flammable to designing landscapes that protect what matters most. I'm really lucky that I've got two fantastic speakers today. We've got Dr. Tim Curran from Lincoln University and Steve Trigg from Fire and Emergency New Zealand with us, and they'll be sharing their advice and expertise. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Tim. Welcome, Tim.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko bendia te maunga, ko namai te awa, ko te whenua o Gamilaroi, no ganara aho, ko Tim Curran, taku ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So I'm an Associate Professor of Ecology at Lincoln University, and it's my great pleasure to be talking to you today about these various different issues: plant flammability, green fire breaks, and how we might reduce fire hazard around the landscape. So I wanted to start by pointing out that science is a team sport, and this slide here, so this is my part of the big team that we have of people that have been helping do work on this topic, and it's really important to understand that science is truly a team sport, and it's been a great privilege to work with this wonderful, diverse, intelligent group of people. So what I want to talk about today is, first of all, why we would worry about fires in New Zealand, and then start by emphasising that one of the most important things you can do with any fire mitigation is use multiple fire mitigation strategies. Okay, so no one measure by itself is going to work. You need to use multiple measures. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the talk talking about that piece of the puzzle that we've mostly been working on, and that's how you would plant different species to improve fire mitigation. Okay, so why would we worry about wildfires in New Zealand? Well, if you want to read a bit more about it, I'd highly recommend you go to this excellent piece of work by Scion, headed up by Lisa Langer. And this piece of work, among other things, showed that there's two key things that are happening in New Zealand in recent years. The first of which is in the blue line here, we're getting an increased number of fire incidents in the wildland urban interface, or WUI. So that's the area where homes border wildlands. And we're also getting an increase in the number of homes that are being destroyed or damaged by wildfire. And we could see that in the area where I live and work. So we had the very tragic and large Port Hills fires back in February 2017, and of course had more fires on the Port Hills again in 2024. And so we're starting to see a number of incidences around the country where we're getting these quite severe and destructive wildfires. And what's the prognosis for the future? Well, so we can see what the predictions are again in this piece of work by Scion that shows that various different parts of the landscape around, or various towns and cities around New Zealand, are expected to have considerable increases in the active crown fire season length. So in other words, basically the more dangerous part of the fire season. And just looking at some of the areas that we have around Marlborough, so Blenheim, Richmond and Nelson, and they're the closest towns up in that area, you can see that depending on the time frame, if you project through to the end of the century, you might be looking at either a 42% increase for Blenheim or a 28 or 30% increase for the areas around Nelson. So we're going to be dealing with wildfires, not just currently, but well into the future as well too. So just turning to that whole idea of how we mitigate fire, and the key thing I want to emphasise, and it's probably one of the most important points to take home, is that the more tools that you use, the better your chances are going to be of surviving a wildfire. And this sort of harks back to the world-leading approach that New Zealand had in its response to COVID, where we used the Swiss cheese model. And basically that was recognising that no one single approach will actually ensure that in this case that you don't get COVID, but if you use many, many different approaches, both at the government level and at a personal level, you're more likely to increase the likelihood that you wouldn't catch that disease. And it's the same with fire mitigation. So with fire mitigation, you want to use multiple fire mitigation strategies. So there's some really simple things you can do. You can clean your gutters, you can move wood piles away from your house, you can ensure that you've got fire truck access. That's a really, really important thing to do. You could use stones, not wood mulch around your garden. You could ensure that you're adequately set up some defensible space, and I'll return to this shortly. Government could ensure that it has firefighting aircraft on standby, or, and this is what the rest of the talk is going to be about, you could use low flammability plantings around your house and around your broader landscape as well too. So first of all, what's defensible space? This comes from a website that Steve is going to spend a bit of time navigating you around. It's the Check It's All Right website from FENZ. And it just basically shows that here in New Zealand, we sort of consider two key zones of defensible space. So the first zone is the first 10 metres around your house, and the second zone is the 10 to 30 metres around your house. And I won't spend too much time on this, but for each of those different zones, there's a range of different measures that you can undertake to improve the likelihood of your house surviving a fire. And the key thing to realise is it's not removing all vegetation, because actually having some, for instance, trees in that defensible space can actually be quite of benefit. For instance, they can block embers that might be blowing ahead of a fire front. Another key piece of work that you should know about, which is also on that Check It's All Right website, is this excellent guide that FENZ did 3 years ago now, looking at safer building design. And so this is all intended to provide landowners and homeowners with a range of different ideas about where fires might penetrate into their house. And importantly, the sorts of measures, for instance here, with different non-combustible roofing material, the sorts of measures that you could undertake to ensure that your house is going to be more hardened against fire. And again, this is all just part of ensuring that you've got those multiple fire strategies. But let's focus now on this last one, the one where most of our work's been done. So looking at low flammability plantings. Now, of course, the first thing you've got to do with this is you've got to measure flammability. And the first really good attempt at this in New Zealand was Liam Fogarty's work back in the early 2000s. And Liam sent a questionnaire survey out to a range of firefighters and fire managers around the country and got them to rank the flammability of 42 different native trees and shrubs. And that was a really, really good first step. But Liam himself acknowledged that that ranking needed to be tested. And that's where we came in. So 14 years ago now, I arrived in Lincoln, and 13 years ago, we set up what we affectionately call our plant barbecue. And this allows us to measure shoot flammability at the scale of 70 centimetre shoots. So if you're a tree or shrub that we're sampling, we'll take a 70 centimetre shoot and burn it on the barbecue. If the plant is less than 70 centimetres in size, we can actually burn the whole plant. And what we do there is we measure a range of different variables, things like maximum temperature reached, the time that it burns for, estimate the percentage biomass loss, and record how quickly it ignites. And all of that allows us to determine the flammability of a given species, and then allows us to compare the flammability of a wide range of different species. So what does that look like in action? So here's a video of our plant barbecue in action. This is my colleague, a former PhD student, Azar Alam, igniting kanuka. So here he ignites it using a blowtorch. As you can see, kanuka ignites very, very quickly, burns quite well. You might notice in the background here, there's a lot of water lying around. This was in the dead of winter. So this was part of sort of like a seasonal based testing. And you can see it actually burns really quite well, even during winter. So what did we find? So this is the initial work. And what we actually did here is we compared our rankings. So this is the rankings down here, the Weiss et al. Rankings. Sarah Weiss was the postdoc running the project, with Liam Fogarty's rankings. And the first and most important thing is that we found there was a good correlation between the two. So in other words, if you are considered to be low in flammability in our rankings, you're also low in flammability in Liam Fogarty's rankings. There were a few different species that were a little bit or had different findings in the two separate schemes. So things like silver beech were unexpectedly more flammable in our testing, as was remu, than they were considered by the experts. And that's probably related to where those species occur in the landscape. So these generally occur in wetter parts of the environment that are less likely to ignite. Having said that, they actually have quite flammable foliage. And so what did we come up with? Well, I won't spend too much time on this, and some of these are, or a lot of these are species that I noticed in the planting guides for, particularly for South Marlborough. Some of them will not be in there, but it's things like, you know, kofi, tree fuchsia, lancewood, five-finger, caramu, red matapo, karaka, broadleaf, kawakawa, and poro are all species that are good low flammability species amongst our natives. And so these are species that that could be considered useful for green firebreaks. And I'll explain where you can find out more information on this shortly. The other thing we did as part of a broader project, which I'll talk about shortly, it's called Fighting Fire with Food, is we actually tested the flammability of a wide range of grape varieties that are found here on the Lincoln campus as part of our viticultural research. And what we actually found was that generally most of these grapes had very low flammability or relatively low flammability. So pretty much all of them were either low, and there was one in the low to moderate class. Pinot Noir, interestingly, didn't ignite at all in our testing, and Riesling was also very low. So it's sort of suggesting that maybe cooler climate grapes are possibly less flammable. But I put this in there because obviously grapes and grape growing are an important aspect of the land use in the Marlborough region. Now, where can you all find information on this? This is the National Plant Flammability Directory that we worked with FENZ to put together. So what this is all found on the FENZ website and the Check It's All Right website, which Steve will show you shortly. Basically, it gives you the common name, the species, the flammability category, the type of plant that it is, so the growth form, what its use is, if that's relevant, and whether it's exotic or native. And you can actually then go through and search all 402 species that are in that database, based primarily on the work that we've done to get a sense of how flammable they are. So I'd highly recommend that you look into that if you're wanting to understand the flammability of different species. And Wendy's actually provided a link to that to that website on the Wire Our Nature Network page. So thanks for doing that, Wendy. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and it's been a key focus of our work here at Lincoln, is understanding the traits, the plant characteristics that influence flammability. And the key person working on this has been Azar Alam, who did his PhD, pretty much his whole PhD looking at this. And this is just one of his more recent papers on the topic. And I guess there's a few sort of key things, and happy to answer any questions about plant traits and flammability. I didn't want to include too much detail in here, on this, but happy to go in more depth with some questions. Basically, the key trait associated with flammability is moisture content, which is shown here by leaf dry matter content, which is the inverse of moisture content. So essentially, the more moisture that a plant retains, the lower the flammability is going to be. Then you have other, for instance, morphological traits like leaf thickness that might be important. Leaf size can be important as well too, although less so. Then you've got a range of architectural traits, so the branching pattern. So finely branched plants like this kanuka here, as opposed to less branched plants like the lemonwood shown here. This one's more flammable than this one. So as I showed for the first time, for a number of these architectural traits, they're quite important, but not as important as leaf traits. And there's a whole range of other traits. Probably the main traits that are useful are moisture content, as I mentioned, the proportion of dead material that a plant retains, and then there's a whole host of these other ones. So leaf morphology traits, leaf chemistry can be important, although not usually as important as these others, and as can the architecture of the fuel. Okay, so now what I want to talk about is green firebreaks. So green firebreaks are strips of low flammability vegetation established at strategic locations across the landscape, designed to reduce fire spread. And they do this by either stopping or slowing the fire front, extinguishing embers and blocking radiant heat. They're best used in conjunction with other firefighting measures. So they might be used as a strategic location where firefighters or firefighting resources might be put in, so that you can actually sort of add additional layers to the benefit. And then, of course, particularly if we use native species, or depending on which species we choose, we can actually provide other services in those green firebreaks. So that includes biodiversity and food. Now, research that Jingli Cui, one of my PhD students, did looking in the Chinese language literature, demonstrated that China is the world leader in establishing green firebreaks. And essentially, by the end of this year, they're on track to have planted over 500,000 kilometres of green firebreaks. And you can see these are these green strips along the ridges throughout this pine plantation. And here's an example of one of those green firebreaks, this Shimmer superba green firebreak, having stopped a fire in one forestry compartment block and prevented it from going into the other blocks. Another project that we've been working on is fighting fire with food. And this is a master's project by Tanmay Pagadala. And this just sort of gives a bit of a demonstration of, a rough suggestion of some of the range of possibilities on how you might, once you know the flammability of different crop species, actually arrange the cropping in your agricultural landscape to, in this case, perhaps ring fence the more flammable cereal crops in this case, and ensure that some of your more flammable crops, so actually trees and pears, apples and pears were found to be some of the most flammable species, that you can actually sort of set them in areas where they're away from your home, and you can sort of protect them and to ensure that the fire mightn't go onto your neighbour's property either. So this was just some of the work that Tanmay did, a link to that work. As I mentioned, cereal crops and these fruits, tree fruits, tend to be the more flammable crops. But then there's a whole range of crops down this end of the spectrum that are actually really low in flammability, including, as I mentioned, for relevance to Marlborough, most of the wine grapes. And this is the sort of the core of a much bigger team working on fighting fire with food. So Lloyd Carpenter, as are Tom Maxwell and Norm Mason. And so we've been sort of working on this for a few years now, trying to establish the flammability of a wide range of different species that might be planted in agricultural landscapes. And what that allows us to do is to sort of see that, as I mentioned, species like pears and apples, interestingly, strawberries might be higher in flammability, as are many of our cereal crops. But then there's a whole range of species that people, eat or are used as grazing or as pasture species for livestock that are down the low end of the flammability list. The other really neat thing is we can also map onto this the flammability of selected mahinga kai, so food species, or rongoa, medicine species. And one of the cool ones here, of course, is kawa, which is one of the most important medicinal plants in New Zealand, but it's also one of the least flammable species we've tested. We simply couldn't get it to ignite on our device. Now, there are some caveats to green firebreaks. One of the most important ones is that there's no such thing as a fireproof plant. So all plants will burn given the right conditions. And of course, those conditions can change seasonally. So this is work done as part of the PhD of Nigel Sultana. So she looked at the flammability of different species at Hinawai Reserve across multiple times in the year. And what she found was species like broadleaf and mountain firefinger were actually very low in flammability all throughout the year. So in other words, they were low flammable species whenever we tested them. Similarly, species like kanuka and gorse, gorse was high in flammability year round. Kanuka did change a bit and became most flammable in sort of spring and summer, but was still very flammable the whole way round. Of importance is finding out that some species that might be good for green firebreaks may have some caveats to them. So for instance, this was mahoe that we found at least in this year, 2019 and 2020, had higher flammability in spring and summer than it did the very low flammability it had in winter and autumn. Also had an honour student, Georgina Woods, who looked at this from the perspective of different crop and weed species. So again, she found that things like lucerne, white clover and yarrow are generally low in flammability year round. Obviously, as you'd expect, the cereal crops like wheat and barley are low in flammability when they're green. So, during the, after they've been planted. And then, of course, when they brown off and are in summer, they're quite high in flammability. But this sort of allows us to have a second look at many of these species that we're suggesting for green firebreaks to see whether they change throughout the year, and if so, how much they change in their flammability. Now, obviously, of relevance to you all up around Marlborough, particularly if you're in the drier parts of the landscape, I just wanted to talk a bit about kanuka and manuka. Now, obviously, these are really, really important native species and incredibly important commercial species. And they're very, very useful nursery plants, particularly on dry hills and other dry sites. Now, of course, they're also highly flammable, okay? So if you've got a dense canopy of either kanuka or manuka, and the fire gets into that canopy, it's going to burn very, very well, okay? So what we would recommend is that you continue to plant them. We're not saying don't plant them, just don't plant them around your house. So don't plant them under a window of your house, for instance. Plant them in the landscape, but the crucial thing is to know the fire hazards that they cause and work out ways of managing those. And you can do that by creating green firebreaks around your manuka and kanuka plantings. You might do it by weaving lower flammability plants in amongst them as well too. I also wanted to talk about some of the podocarps. Now, podocarps are great and a really important component of our native ecosystems in New Zealand. The thing is that several of them are actually reasonably flammable. Okay, so things like bog pine are very high, celery top is quite high, even totara, which has some really unique, interesting oils which are highly flammable, can be moderate in flammability. So again, it's not a case of don't plant those, just be aware of the flammability of them and maybe think of ways to mitigate that flammability until they grow tall enough, like in this picture here, where it's going to take a really severe fire to actually get into the canopy. And this sort of gets to the, I guess, one of the main points that you want to think about when you're planting for restoration in New Zealand is, and I'm sure many of you understand the concept of succession. So succession is just the change in species composition over time, usually since a disturbance. And the really interesting thing that we have here in New Zealand is that basically there's a hump-shaped curve in flammability in the time since the last fire. Okay, and that flammability is at its highest in the early stages post disturbance. So post disturbance, you'd get native things coming in like bracken, and then manuka, and then kanuka, and that whole system is generally going to be quite flammable for potentially many decades, and depending on where you are in the landscape, maybe up to 80 years or more. And also, we've got a whole range of weed species that we've introduced to New Zealand from more fire-prone landscapes overseas. So things like gorse, hakea from Australia, pine species and eucalypts are also quite flammable. And when you get some of those weeds in the system, this can actually make this relative flammability increase in these early stages until you get canopy closure and until you get towards a more mature New Zealand forest. And that's the really neat thing with New Zealand forests is what we're actually aiming for, the forest at the end of it, is actually generally low in flammability. And so that actually is a benefit for conservation, and it might be for food provision, mahinga kai and rongoa as well too, but it's also a benefit for fire mitigation. So in summary, fires are an issue for New Zealand. We're seeing an increase in the number of wildfires and the increase in the destruction that they're causing in New Zealand. The main take-home message from this is you need to use multiple mitigation strategies. The more strategies you use, the better. And some of those strategies are quite costly, but some of them are actually surprisingly cheap. You know, just cleaning your gutters is a really good sort of maintenance thing that you can do that's going to enhance the chance of your house surviving a fire. And a key part of this, of course, is low flammability plantings around your home or around your house paddock, but also green firebreaks at a larger scale around the landscape. And I think we're going to save questions to the end, but I'm not going to save my dad joke till then. Because I'm a dad, I get to make dad jokes. In about 15 minutes time, when Steve's finished, I'll be happy to answer any burning questions that anyone has.
I do have one. How wide does the green firebreak, how wide should it be in theory?
Yeah, great question. So there's actually a lot of debate about this and not a huge amount of testing. Some of the green firebreaks that have actually stopped quite substantial fires in China have been as narrow as 10 meters wide. It's pretty much going to be a case of the wider it can be, the better it's going to be. There's some rules of thumb that you want it to be, the green fire rate to be wider than the, I think it's 1.5 times the height of the flames. And so you can sort of base that on the vegetation that you're up against. There's some information out there, and I'll send some information on this that we have from, say, from China on some suggestions there. It also is going to heavily depend on the context. If you're at the top of a ridge, or if you're got a more flammable vegetation type burning into that green firebreak, it's potentially going to have to be wider than that. And the other key thing to think about there too is the nature of how the fire might spread beyond that area. So the potential for the vegetation to actually have firebrands, embers blowing ahead of the fire front. And some of those, particularly with eucalypts, can blow up to many kilometres, even tens of kilometres. And pines can also be quite bad, sort of kilometre spread of embers. So there you're getting away from green firebreaks as being the only solution, and you want to be looking at all those multiple solutions.
Kia ora koutou, ko Steve Trigg ingoa. Kai whakahaere mō te mahi mōria hāpuri for titaihu whakaratonga iwi. So I'm community risk manager here in the top of the south. Been up here for about 4 years now. Really what I wanted to try and do to support Tim and help close the loop really around what Tim's been talking about, and instead of having to go back to the recording and having a look at screenshots, just show you a little bit through our Fire Emergency Check It's Alright website. Look, the Check It's Alright website is the source of all information when it comes to risk around wildfire and reducing it and preparing for it. So our call to action will always be, when it comes to wildfires, to check it's all right, because it will help you do those three things. And it's extremely important for us, and you'll probably see more signs going up. I think we just replaced the one at Koromiko, which is about volunteering for fire and emergency, but also has check it's all right on that sign and others. So and all our signs around Marlborough at the moment, fire season indicator, also have check it's all right on it. So it is an important website for us, and it's a continual improvement model. So we're changing it all the time to ensure it's as easy as possible to navigate through. So the three main things on this website is how to prevent fires, which is always our first call to action. We want to prevent anything from starting. So preparation and obviously any response aren't as necessary, but always helps to be prepared. So reducing the risk is always the first place to go, and no matter what you do when you go through this website, it gives you as many options as possible and a lot of information, but it'll always guide you to, can you actually light a fire, or can you do what these particular things are telling you. So for example, I'll go to burn piles just because it's probably the most common thing, especially in that particular area, and it gives you tips around burn piles. As you can see, there's a video there. I won't play the video, it's quite long. But what it does, it goes through, always check if you require a permit first and all. That's the compliance side of it. The last thing anyone wants to be is put in a position where they might end up in court or anything like that. So we really highly recommend checking always if a permit's required, if you can light the fire, and I'll get back to that, how easy that is in a minute. But it does give you setting up your fire, lighting your fire guides, talks you all the way through it. Pretty simple, including a video, and how to contact us, how to notify us as well. So that's one example of, they're all pretty much the same. Cultural cooking, there's not a video on that, but there's plenty of information here. Again, check it's all right, can I light the fire? There's different rules around cultural cooking, there's different rules, so it's always pays to go in and check what else you got in here. So any land burn, so another spark generating thing is activity. Those of you that be familiar with for example, the Pigeon Valley fire, one of our largest and most expensive fires in New Zealand's history, caused by mowing at the wrong time of the year, got away on the poor gentleman really quickly, and obviously cause millions of dollars worth of damage. So again, check it's all right, and you can check the weather conditions, gives you some information about what else you can do, how you can prepare for that. And there is a preparedness as well, which I'll go into that more in a minute, because you've heard some of that from Dr. Tim as well. The second part is preparing, how to prepare. In fact, I'll go home first to show you. So reduce the risk first and foremost, always when it comes to lighting. So that's a behavioural thing, and that's what I want people to focus on. Should I be doing this? Should I be mowing? Should I be lighting a fire? What Tim was talking about was around being prepared. So this is you helping us help you. Our job is a lot easier if you've done some work yourselves as property owners, as landowners, and whether that is building. Again, there's more videos. We love videos at Fire and Emergency. Whether it's building your home and whether it's preparing the land around your home, at any time. So the safer housing guide is here, simple, hook onto it, and that'll bring it up. And then here it is, quite a large document. Everything is in there that you need to know. So you don't need to go off rummaging around thinking, where do I get it? Emailing Wendy or us at Fine Emergency. It's all sitting in here. When it comes to, first and foremost, when it comes to, can I light a fire? So at the moment, we want to check whether or not we can light a fire. So you just simply go hit light a fire. I wanted to run a burn pile, and that'll ask me where. It gives us a map, which we can go into Waido Valley. We'll just choose somewhere around here. When? Tomorrow. And what this gives us the information, a little bit about weather. It's just checking our website to see whether the fire, what the season is at the moment. I would say it's open unless I've picked a public land. Yes, it is. So it's saying what the fire danger is. Yes, it's open at the moment. So there is, but there are conditions, and sometimes people make the mistake that a fire permit supersedes everything else. It does not. So you do need to check local bylaws, etc. And of course, first and foremost, you must have the landowner's permission if you're not the landowner. And there is a list of things that you can check as well. That covers mostly the website. I'm more than happy to answer more questions about that. But as I said, it's pretty simple. How to prevent a fire in the first place, how to be prepared, worst case scenario, and then can I light the fire? The second thing I wanted to point out today, and it's a bit hard to do without, was our another public site that's available for everyone was the NIWA fire weather site. So that's fireweather.niwa.co.nz, and this is a simple thing for you to navigate as well and have a look at around what is happening in my patch and can I light a fire, what works can I do, and even to better understand what this means for us. In the particular, again, easy to navigate. We know where we live. We hit it. We know where our valleys around here somewhere. Boom, we can hit that. Gives us a really quick indication of what's happening. Pretty low at the moment. But what does that mean for us in the Waido Valley? So we can actually have a look at that through our fire indices. This is where you can become a fire behavior expert. Oh, I've got the wagon wheel. All right, we'll let that do its own thing for a minute there. You can get right into what this looks like as far as if we just go straight into Waido Valley. It was actually low when I looked at this about half an hour ago. This takes snapshots. This is from the weather station every day. It's now moderate, the conditions. As you can see, there's Waido Valley there. This is what it covers. This is the forecast, so current all the way through to Monday. And it does cover off the indices around this is what we base our fire danger on, the indices, and gives you some trends there as well. So I'll just go back to see if it's my wagon wheel is going to, there we go, cool. So Lansdowne is what we were at. So we can see scrub is generally elevated, subjective scrub, but it is generally elevated. As Tim said, it is fairly dangerous all year round, depending on other conditions. But as you can see, these are the indices here, and you're probably wondering what is BUI and ISI and whatnot. So you just hover over them up here. BUI, we use two main things to change the fire season. So when you see the fire season indicator, it's our build-up index, which is the heavier fuels. It gives you a description of what BUI means and how it's made up of, and then what does it look like when it becomes extreme for us. And then the other one we use is grass curing. So to give you an indication of how we change the fire season, BUIs, we go restricted around 40 to 80, and 80 plus is completely is closed. 40 to 80, 0 to 40 for BUI, and 40 to 80 for restricted and 80 is closed. And then we use grass curing. So grass curing again, we do the grass curing ourselves. We do have a satellite system which we are working with at the moment, but we've got to check it manually ourselves. And anything over 80 again is closed for grass curing. So that just gives you a wee indication, easy to find by using the maps here. You can find it where you live. Waiho Valley, for example, Lansdowne, scroll down, have a look at that. And then you can also see what it's looking like on Monday.
That's great, thanks, Steve. And just a reminder from both Tim and Steve that the low flammability plant lists are on the FENZ website. So a really quick, easy way to find out those.
So you can just, easiest is to go to the bigger ones. It's about reducing that risk. And you've got low flammability planting down here. If you're impatient like me, you can go up here, reducing your risk. And there's a low flam planting there. And everything is in here, including so there's a video there, another video. And there's your planting list. And you can filter by plant, by use, by their origin, and by flammability as well. So everything is in there. A lot of work's gone into that. Indigenous is a big thing as well. And if you're working with Department of Conservation, is something that we've always done when it comes to planting projects. Highly recommend reaching out to DOC if you're looking at doing something significant, just to ensure that they're going to survive in the area as well.
Quite often these green firebreaks might be popped next to a road, and that enhances their function as a fire mitigation tool, because you've also got the road width, which can actually allow you to, or provides an area where there's less fuel, and it actually allows firefighters and firefighting resources to get in there and then use that green firebreak as a strategic point to fight that fire. So I would imagine that, well, obviously not up some of those steep slopes, and that's probably why they use them on some of those steep slopes, is they're using them as a bit of a plant and forget type model. So it sort of allows you to deal with things in more inaccessible terrain. But I would advocate that, you know, again, as I mentioned previously, having a green firebreak in conjunction with other things. So having a road near, or just a dirt track that's accessible to fire trucks would be quite useful, because then the fire trucks can get in there, use that feature to their advantage. Yeah, there's a number of different ways that you can use green firebreaks depending on what your broader goals are in the landscape.
There's basically two phases of restoration, isn't there? There's the blank canvas when you're starting from scratch, and you've talked about having low flammability plantings interspersed with your higher flammability ones. What happens if you've got an existing forest fragment? It might be kanuka, or it might be something else. What can you do to protect that and surrounding land?
So one good thing would be to go out and chat to some of the fire managers in your landscape and talk to them about what their concerns would be, you know, where a fire might come, how a fire might spread onto that or spread out of that, and talk through some mitigation measures. You could, as I mentioned, you could actually ring fence some of those with green fire, you know, like native species of low flammability, and that would help enhance, well, actually increases a buffer around your fragment of, you know, additional habitat, but can also help protect it against fire. Or alternately, you could interplant it with lower flammability species and speed up that successional process, because that's the key thing, as I mentioned, is often the plan is to get to back to native bush in a lot of these areas. And, you know, by planting a lot of those later successional species, you're generally planting lower flammability species.
And get rid of the goats. I went to a forest fragment that was primarily kanuka, and it was just all eaten out. So all those luscious green understory, all gone.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Like if a plant's highly palatable to to mammals, it's likely to be low in flammability. Having said that, there is actually a place for grazing to reduce flammability, and that would be to keep your grass levels down. So Christchurch City Council has got some extensive patches of kanuka on the Port Hills that they've started to become quite worried about. But what they're doing is a combination of green firebreak planting and actually using targeted sheep grazing to keep the grass levels down, because the main fuel around those kanuka patches is the grassy paddocks. So you can do some different things there.
Well, that's actually a nice segue into the next question about what's the comparison between fire breaks of bare dirt or mown grass and green fire breaks?
Yeah, I'll have a quick go at this and then hand over to Steve. Obviously, not having any fuel there makes it less likely. Well, if you have no fuel, it can't catch a light. But one of the things that green fire breaks do quite well is they also have a blocking role. So they can block radiant heat and they can block embers. And so it was interesting when I went to a workshop on this in Australia. They're even quite flammable plants like eucalypts can actually be quite important in the vicinity of a house for their ability to trap embers, to block embers. And if they're trimmed up and so the fire can't get from the ground up into their canopy, having those trees there to block embers is actually possibly an even more vital function than having just nothing there, but particularly if you've got an ember storm raining down on your house. And in Australia and New Zealand, the main way that houses are lost through fire is via embers blowing onto the house and then igniting something on or near the house and getting in that way. It generally tends to be less likely to be radiant heat or direct fire contact. Steve, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think if you're thinking, well, actually, we have a section in our Act, Section 62, which talks about our ability to, I guess, pose control on fire breaks to ensure they are clear. But taking that into account, a bare fire break would require a lot more maintenance than one with low flammability planting, and we would never enact. We wouldn't enact 62 as if it was low flammability planting, and that was done in conjunction with fire emergency. So if it's a commercial fire break, always recommend working with the right people to consider low flammability planting, because yeah, they would require to be useful. As you can imagine, they would require a lot of maintenance. Grass needs to be kept low because it'll cure and become just added fuel. And move very quickly, and therefore become a problem for us. So my suggestion is definitely consider low flammability planting, and that'll give us the best possible opportunity to deal with it.
Fantastic.
I was just going to quickly add to that, maintenance is key, because some of these low flammable plants will produce dead material, and you need to remove that if you're wanting them to function well as a green fire break. Yeah.
And before we finish, just one final question. When you're establishing a restoration project, getting your early plants, and does density of planting make a difference in terms of fire mitigation or risk?
Yeah, so it probably will in terms of you'll get quicker canopy, like if you're aiming for a rainforest type community, which a lot of our native bush is, you'll actually get canopy closure a lot quicker. And so that'll do two things. One is it'll keep out a lot of the shade intolerant weeds that are highly flammable. So some of our introduced grasses and our native grasses for that matter, but also things like gorse. And the other thing that will do too is it will have a microclimate effect. So if you've got a nice shaded canopy, you're going to have a much higher humidity, lower temperatures. And so green fire breaks, when they're actually formed as essentially a rainforest canopy, there's probably a key role that microclimate plays in preventing fire spread there as well too. So that can be really useful and a really quick way to get through to the later stage successional low flammable community that you might be aiming for. So yeah, if you have the resources and time to do that, go for it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Steve and Tim, for your expertise. And you've also shared a lot of fantastic resources that we will pop onto our website, and as well as this recording. So yeah, thank you very much for your time and thank you for all the participants in joining us today. And we hope that we will see you at our next lot of workshops or webinars. So I will end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you.